His next and final point was the failure of naturalism, and I understand that in an opening statement you're only supposed to give arguments for your position, and you wait until your rebuttal to refute the evidence that your opponent gives. But I do have to say I think it was a bit premature to say the failure of naturalism when he hadn't yet addressed my arguments. But he went on to say, yeah, but if naturalism is true, how could you have the laws of logic or the laws of mathematics? Well, how could you not? I can't even comprehend what it would mean to say that the law of non-contradiction doesn't hold. That just doesn't even make sense. He says, well, what about the sanctity of human life? Well, here's the fundamental difference in naturalistic worldviews and, I would say, theistic worldviews. The naturalist could say that human life is special, but if he did, it would not be special in the sense that most theists, at least in my experience, say that it's special. In fact, I misplaced my notes on this point, but basically the point I wanted to make is, in my experience, theists typically say that humans are the only moral agents, and the fact that other animals can experience pain, it has no moral significance. Whereas I don't want to speak for all naturalists, but I would say that on naturalism, human life is not special in that sense. Yes, humans are the only moral agents, but other animals are capable of feeling pain, and that is morally significant. They can't be held responsible for the decisions they make, but humans, as moral agents, do have some sort of an obligation to take that into account in how we treat them. As for free will, I'd like to hear more explanation on that point also. He hasn't really given an argument for theism. He just says that we can't account for free will. Look, he's got the burden of proof here. If he wants to say that free will provides evidence for theism, then he needs to explain that. Take that into account, add in the 8 arguments for naturalism which I gave that haven't been addressed, and I think it's pretty clear the evidence still supports naturalism and not theism. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to state a few things. Jeff listed 8 areas where he believed that 8 lines of evidence for naturalism is what he referred to them as. He said that naturalism provides the best evidence for the physical cause of minds, or the mind's dependency on the physical. In this present state of existence, I know of no theist who would argue that the immaterial mind is in some way dependent upon the physical brain. Okay, but that's not the issue. The issue is there an immaterial mind? So he's really not addressing that. He's missing the point. I'd also like to refer to the research of Habermas and Moreland, 2 Christian philosophers. Their work, Immortality, the Other Side of Death. They discussed the results of recent brain research independently by several scientists who are of the naturalistic mindset. Wilder Penfield, Roger Sperry, Hans Kuhnhuber, and B. Liebet. Their research seems to indicate that human decision-making processes occur apart from the brain, though it does affect brain state. They basically learn to prod certain areas of the human brain and get people to raise their right hand, and they would ask the people, well, what happened? They thought the people were going to say, I decided to raise my right hand, and I did. And instead the people responded, you raised my right hand. And so it seems to at least imply that the decision-making doesn't occur in the brain. Decision-making occurs somewhere else and acts upon the brain. But I would agree with him that the present state of the mind is somewhat dependent upon the brain, but that doesn't prove naturalism one bit. Number 2, he talked about that naturalism is the best explanation for the relationship between the simple and complex life forms, and he mentioned the fossil record as that being the place where you would find that evidence. Well, Dr. Colin Patterson, Senior Principal Scientific Officer of the Paleontology Department of the British Museum of Natural History in London, in a personal letter to Dr. Sunderland, dated April 10th, 1979, stated this, and Patterson is one of the world's foremost experts on the fossil record. He is an atheistic evolutionist, and he stated this: I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. Yet Gould and the American Museum people are hard to contradict when they say there are no transitional forms. You say that I should at least show a photo of the fossil from which each type of organism is derived. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. Now, he continues to believe his atheistic evolution, but here's the foremost expert on the fossil record, and he admits that the evidence is not there, whereas Jeff is claiming that it is. And this idea the lowest levels are simple, and then you get more complex as you go on, that's the rule. Well, there's probably as many exceptions to the rule as there are rules. It took millions of years for these layers to form. One wonders how these exceptions took place. One wonders about the problem of polystrate fossils, trees growing through several layers that supposedly took millions of years to form. So I don't think you're going to find the evidence for evolution in the fossil record. He mentioned molecular biology. Michael Behe's work there, and by the way, Dawkins has been asked to debate Michael Behe and has turned him down, and I think it's a good decision. Michael Behe is a microbiologist. He's the associate professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University, and he argues that the irreducible complexity of subcellular organic structure shows that they could not have evolved. He gives several examples from psyllium, what he says that there's structure that some cells use to swim in, blood clotting, how cells transport materials from one subcellular compartment to another, the origin of the immune system, the intricate system required by the cell to make just one of its building blocks. Behe argues that these molecular mechanisms are comprised of many parts that interact in complex ways, and that no single part can function usefully unless all the other parts are present. And then he argues that there's no way that these systems could be produced step by step, and therefore these molecular mechanisms are designed, and he compares them with the design of spaceships and computers. Now, this is a guy coming from the evolutionist camp. He is right now a theistic evolutionist, so this is not your special creationist camp, but he seems to be the expert in the field that secular humanists need to dialogue with if they want to make that case. Jeff mentioned things like pain and pleasure, and he focused on Ebola victims, unnecessary pain and suffering, and why does God allow Ebola victims why doesn't he allow them to suffer less? He talks about tragedies such as the church youth group, the bus, and several died, and no good could come out of this, but Jeff isn't an infinitely wise being, so I don't see how he could say that no good can come out of this. God often uses tragedies to draw people to himself so they don't fall in love with this present life, and so they hope for a hereafter. In fact, Blaise Pascal went on to argue that the only good thing about this present life, he's overemphasizing his point, the only good thing about this present life is the hope of another life after this one. So God often uses suffering to draw people to himself. In fact, William Lane Craig has basically stated that evangelical Christianity is experiencing its most rapid and sustained growth in countries that are experiencing intense suffering. An example he gives is El Salvador, where over 80% of the population live in poverty. In 1960, only 2.3% of the population were evangelicals. Now, well over 20% of the population are evangelicals. The same could be said about China, the Philippines, Ethiopia. And so it seems that God uses suffering to draw people to himself so that they would not be all caught up in this present life. Jesus of Nazareth said, "Man does not live on bread alone, but on every utterance of the mouth of God." We fell, according to Christian theism, we fell in the garden. Things aren't the way they ought to be, and that the only solution to the problem of evil, and by the way, the problem of evil is just not a hypothetical problem, and I'd like to hear a definition of it from Jeff. How does the atheist define evil? Because how do you define a crooked line unless you have some concept of a straight line?